Welcome back to our series on resolving conflicts. In our previous module, we explored why stakeholder conflicts happen and examined strategies for addressing them, particularly with executive stakeholders. Let's take the next step by focusing on effectively mediating conflicts between stakeholders and rebuilding relationships after conflicts have occurred. Mediation skills are especially valuable when caught between stakeholders with competing interests. Whether it's sales pushing for custom features while engineering advocates for platform stability, or marketing wanting a redesign while finance pushes for cost control, your ability to help these groups find common ground is crucial to your success as a product leader. In this module, we'll explore effective communication practices that prevent misunderstandings, techniques for successful mediation, and strategies to rebuild trust when relationships have been strained. These skills will help you resolve immediate conflicts and create stronger, more resilient relationships throughout your organization. Let's begin by exploring how communication practices can prevent many conflicts before they escalate. The number one job of a product leader is communication. Everything else we've talked about in this course is tremendously important, but if you can't communicate effectively, you'll struggle to implement even the best strategies. One devastating assumption I've seen throughout my career is that when stakeholders don't hear about your team's work, they assume nothing is happening. This silent gap becomes fertile ground for frustration and conflict. Imagine this scenario. A marketing executive requests a feature enhancement, and you agree it's important, but have higher priorities first. 6 months pass with no updates. From their perspective, you ignored their request. When they finally confront you, they might say something like, "So your team doesn't actually deliver anything?" Not realizing you've completed numerous other critical projects in that time frame. To prevent this misunderstanding, I've developed a regular communication rhythm. I write up detailed release notes every 2 weeks and share them widely. These aren't just technical changelog entries. They explain in business language what we built, why we built it, and what value it delivers to the company and customers. I specifically tag people who have requested features or might benefit from the updates, and I also share them in general channels where everyone can see them. This practice serves multiple purposes. It creates visibility for your team's work, acknowledges stakeholder contributions and requests, builds credibility by demonstrating consistent delivery, and educates the organization about product development priorities and trade-offs. Even when stakeholders don't get what they want immediately, they can see that the team is productive and their request hasn't disappeared into a black hole. Smaller, more frequent touch points work better for managing individual stakeholder relationships than extensive quarterly reviews. I prefer holding bi-weekly meetings with key stakeholders, either one-on-one or in small groups focused on similar concerns. This cadence gives me enough time to make progress between meetings while ensuring stakeholders never feel out of the loop for too long. During these meetings, I deliberately focus conversations on outcomes rather than jumping straight to solutions. When stakeholders start proposing specific features or designs, I gently redirect them with questions like, "Help me understand what problem you're trying to solve," or "What outcome would make this initiative successful from your perspective?" This shifts the discussion from prescriptive solutions to collaborative problem solving. This outcomes-focused approach connects to the concept of thematic road mapping we discussed earlier in the course. Organizing work around themes and outcomes rather than specific features creates space for multiple stakeholders to see how their needs will be addressed, even if the implementation differs from what they initially envisioned. Another crucial communication practice is documentation. Document conclusions and the why behind them after significant discussions or decisions, especially those involving trade-offs between competing stakeholder priorities. This creates a shared reference point that prevents revisiting the same debates repeatedly and helps new team members understand the context behind current priorities. Sometimes you need to step in as a mediator between conflicting stakeholders. This is particularly important when the conflict directly impacts your product's success or creates a toxic environment that affects team morale. How you approach this mediation role can make the difference between resolution and escalation. First, thoughtfully consider when to intervene. I watch for several signals that suggest mediation is needed. When productive disagreement has devolved into personal attacks, when there's an impending deadline with no resolution in sight, when conflicts are beginning to affect other teams, or when emotions are running high. Any of these situations warrant consideration of stepping in as a mediator. However, I'm careful about how I enter these situations. Rushing in can sometimes undermine people's agency or professional standing. Before intervening, I often approach individuals privately with questions like, I've noticed some tension around this issue. Would it be helpful if I facilitated a discussion to work through it? Or, what kind of support would be most useful to you right now? This approach respects their professionalism while offering assistance. When you do take on the mediator role, setting clear ground rules is essential. Begin the session by establishing expectations for how participants will engage. You might say, we're here to find a solution that works for everyone. Let's agree to focus on the issues rather than personalities. Allow everyone to speak without interruption, and approach this conversation with genuine curiosity about other perspectives. These ground rules create a container for productive discussion, even when emotions are intense. Rather than focusing on positions, what people say they want, guide the conversation toward interests, why they want it. Positions often appear incompatible, while underlying interests frequently have more common ground. For example, suppose the sales team insists on building a specific enterprise feature while the product team wants to focus on improving the core experience. In that case, revenue growth and product adoption might be underlying interests, which can be addressed in multiple ways beyond the initial positions. Visual mapping can be particularly effective during mediation. Use a whiteboard or shared digital space to represent the conflict and potential solutions visually. This might include decision trees, priority matrices, or even simple pros-cons lists. Visualizing the issue moves the conversation from abstract disagreement to concrete problem solving, creating a shared reference point with which everyone can engage. Create space for each party to express their perspective without interruption. Research from Harvard's negotiation program shows that people are much more willing to consider alternative viewpoints after they feel their own perspective has been fully heard and acknowledged. This doesn't mean allowing endless venting, but rather ensuring that each stakeholder can articulate their concerns and feel genuinely understood before moving to solutions. I haven't taught a lot of active listening skills in this course, but when I say helping stakeholders feel like their views have been heard, one way you might do that is by using paraphrasing. It's an active listening skill where, after giving somebody time to talk, you say back to them what they said, but slightly differently. You paraphrase it. You say, what I'm hearing is, and then you expand. When someone feels heard and validated, they're more likely to listen to you. They're more likely to be able to move on from that point. So make sure that you're actively listening, and then help the person know that you really heard and understood them by saying back to them what they heard, what you heard. And if you didn't get it right, it also gives them an opportunity to clarify. Keep going, paraphrasing back to them what you're hearing until they feel validated and they confirm that you're hearing it correctly. If things start to get more tense where they just keep saying, you're not hearing me, what could be happening is, honestly, they may not be doing a good job of communicating their point. They might be having either an emotional conversation or an identity conversation that's being masked by the what went wrong conversation or by the factual conversation. As we talked about earlier in the course, you might have to take breaks. You might have to come back to it later. You might have to explore it in writing exercises. But make sure that you gain that understanding of what the person is really needing and make sure that they feel heard and validated. If you accomplish that, they are much more likely to listen to your point and to help work towards a solution. Throughout the mediation, look for opportunities to highlight areas of agreement. When tensions are high, people tend to focus exclusively on differences. By periodically summarizing points of consensus, like saying, it seems we all agree that improving user onboarding is important and that we need to address the enterprise market this year. You remind participants that they share common ground and goals. After exploring the issues thoroughly, guide the group toward generating multiple potential solutions before evaluating any of them. This two-step process, first diverging to create options, then converging to evaluate them, prevents premature dismissal of ideas and often leads to creative solutions that address multiple stakeholder concerns. Once you've helped stakeholders reach a resolution, document the agreement and ensure everyone leaves with clear next steps. This documentation becomes valuable if questions arise later about what was decided. Even after a conflict is resolved, the damage to the relationship can linger if not adequately addressed. Building trust after conflicts requires intentional effort and consistent follow through. The most fundamental element of rebuilding trust is delivering on commitments. You must follow through if you say you will do something as part of a conflict resolution. If circumstances change and you can't deliver as promised, communicate proactively rather than letting deadlines pass silently. Let me share a personal experience that illustrates this point. I worked alongside a colleague at the same management level early in my career. Everyone liked him. He was charismatic, friendly, and well connected throughout the organization. I was more introverted and task-focused, which made me naturally less popular. A senior colleague once told me something that surprised me. While my peer was well liked, I was well respected. The difference? When I committed to something, I consistently delivered, while my charismatic colleague often made promises he couldn't keep. He'd enthusiastically agree to requests without considering whether he had the knowledge or capacity to fulfill them. Over time, people stopped bringing important matters to him despite liking him personally, ultimately limiting his career growth. Follow-through is non-negotiable for maintaining stakeholder trust, especially after conflicts. Each delivery builds credibility. Each missed commitment erodes it. Even small commitments matter. Sending that follow-up email, sharing those metrics, or having that conversation with another team all demonstrate reliability. Beyond personal follow-through, establish regular check-ins on the solutions you've agreed upon. These check-ins serve multiple purposes. They show ongoing commitment to the resolution, provide opportunities to make adjustments, and create space to address any lingering concerns before they grow into new conflicts. Pay particular attention to the emotional aspects of rebuilding relationships. Conflicts touch on identity issues we discussed in our module on difficult conversations. People may feel their competence, autonomy, or status was challenged during the conflict. Regular check-ins that acknowledge these dimensions by asking, "How are you feeling about our progress?" or "Is our current approach working for your team?" allow these concerns to surface constructively. Creating dedicated channels for raising concerns before they become conflicts is another powerful trust-building practice. This might be a regular friction log, discussion in team meetings, an anonymous feedback mechanism, or simply establishing an open door policy where stakeholders know they can bring emerging issues to you early. When people trust their concerns will be heard, they're less likely to let frustrations build to the breaking point. For particularly significant conflicts, consider implementing a blameless postmortem. Unlike typical retrospectives that focus on what went well and what could be improved, conflict postmortems specifically examine the conflict itself, how it emerged, how it was handled, and what could be done differently next time. The key is making these truly blameless, focused on systems and patterns rather than individual shortcomings. When facilitating these postmortems, establish clear communication ground rules. One effective technique from Stone and Heen's work on difficult conversations is to begin by having each participant state their assumptions explicitly. This might sound like, "Here are the assumptions I was operating under during our disagreement." By naming these assumptions openly, you create distance between the person and their perspective, making it easier to examine them objectively. Research from organizational psychology shows that teams that practice structured reflection after conflicts experience significantly fewer recurring issues and report higher levels of psychological safety. By treating conflicts as learning opportunities rather than failures, you build an environment where healthy disagreement can flourish without devolving into destructive conflict. While effective conflict resolution is essential, preventing unnecessary conflicts is even more valuable. Let's explore some proactive approaches that can significantly reduce the frequency and intensity of stakeholder conflicts. Aligning incentives across teams is the most potent preventive measure. When different departments have metrics that put them at odds, conflict isn't just likely, it's virtually guaranteed. For example, if product managers are measured on user retention while sales are measured solely on new accounts, tension will arise when those goals require different product decisions. Work with leadership to create shared OKRs or goals that encourage collaboration. When marketing, sales, product, and engineering all share responsibility for key customer satisfaction metrics or revenue milestones, they're much more likely to find cooperative approaches to challenges. If formal metric alignment isn't immediately possible, Create informal agreements with peer leaders about supporting each other's goals while working toward changing the formal measurement systems. Regular stakeholder alignment meetings provide a forum for surfacing and addressing potential conflicts before they become entrenched. Unlike tactical project status meetings, these sessions focus on broader priorities, upcoming initiatives, and possible resource constraints. A monthly cadence works well for these conversations, frequent enough to catch emerging issues, but not so frequent that they become burdensome. Structure these meetings carefully to maximize their preventive value. Begin with a brief review of organizational priorities and how current initiatives support them. This grounds the conversation in shared objectives. Then, create space for each stakeholder to share their upcoming priorities and concerns. Finally, explicitly identify potential conflicts or trade-offs and discuss how to navigate them collectively. Developing a clear, transparent prioritization framework dramatically reduces perceptions of arbitrary or biased decision-making. Whether you use RICE, weighted scoring, or another methodology, what matters is that stakeholders understand how decisions are made. When someone's request isn't prioritized, they should be able to see exactly why. Not because you didn't value their input, but because other initiatives scored higher on agreed upon criteria. Document this framework and use it consistently in stakeholder conversations. Over time, this consistency builds trust in the process, even when specific outcomes aren't what stakeholders hoped for. Some product leaders even involve key stakeholders in creating or refining their prioritization framework, increasing buy-in. Perhaps most importantly, invest in relationship building outside of specific conflicts or requests. Get to know your stakeholders as people. Understand their professional backgrounds, current challenges, and personal interests where appropriate. These connections create goodwill that serves as a buffer when disagreements inevitably arise. Schedule coffee chats or informal check-ins with no specific agenda beyond relationship building. Ask questions about their department's goals, what success looks like for them, and what challenges they're facing. This builds rapport and gives you valuable context for understanding their future requests and concerns. In this module, we've explored stakeholder conflicts and powerful tools for resolving tensions and rebuilding trust. We've seen how communication serves as both prevention and cure, how regular updates and transparency create visibility that prevents the assumptions and misunderstandings that so often spark conflict in the first place. When conflicts do arise, we now have a roadmap for effective mediation. We transform confrontation into collaboration by establishing ground rules that create psychological safety, focusing on underlying interests rather than entrenched positions, and guiding stakeholders to generate multiple solutions before evaluation. This approach doesn't just solve immediate problems, it strengthens relationships for future challenges. There are ways to rebuild damaged trust. Fractured relationships can heal through consistent follow-through on commitments, regular check-ins demonstrating ongoing care, and blameless postmortems that extract learning rather than assign fault. Combining these practices with proactive measures such as aligning incentives and holding regular stakeholder alignment meetings helps conflict be less frequent and more constructive. As you return to your work, consider starting with just one practice we've discussed, perhaps implementing regular release notes or scheduling informal check-ins with key stakeholders. Small changes, applied consistently, can dramatically reduce friction points before they escalate into full-blown conflicts. In our next module, we'll explore conflicts within your team and examine how team structure and methodology shape conflict patterns. You'll learn how to foster an environment where disagreement fuels innovation rather than discord. Remember, the goal isn't a conflict-free workplace. Such an environment would lack the creative tension that drives innovation. Instead, aim for productive rather than destructive conflicts that clarify rather than confuse, that strengthen rather than strain. By applying the mediation and trust-building techniques we've explored, you transform potential flashpoints into opportunities for alignment, understanding, and, ultimately, better outcomes for everyone involved.